if I'm going to go buy a product is I want to go and see who the CEO is, and again, I'm a solopreneur. I also have my private equity company. We do purchase software. I want to understand who's the leadership team. I want to understand what they've done before. And so it's frustrating when you go then to a profile and you don't see anything there, or you go to a website and there's not a lot about the team, because with the proliferation of software, it's so easy for somebody to stand up a product. But it is important for the buyer, for us to understand who's behind it, because if I'm going to invest the time, the effort, and the money to be implementing this software, I want to know that they're going to be around for a while, that it's not a fly by night and then within 18 months, I'm not going to have a piece of software. I'm going to have to move to something else, because those things do happen.
100%, you've nailed it. And I think especially when it comes to higher dollar amount, right? So maybe if it's like B2B software, it's not the same, right? It could be something that is a lower cost versus not. But if you're thinking about something that will cost a department $30K a year, $40K a year, however it is, or even it might be something that is $200 per person for a company, it still adds up, right? For whoever has to sign off. And that's exactly it. So you want to make sure that whoever is behind it is going to be around for a while. They know what they're doing. Do they have other customers? Do they have customers in my area? Do they have social proof, right? And that brand affinity does make a huge difference. And I think where we have been so far is that big software companies have kind of relied on saying, okay, we can wine and dine whoever the decision maker is at a real event or get on a call with them, because things are changing now. The same customers are wanting to have the same kind of experience as, what Spotify does, like almost like self-service, and you can kind of see before you buy, right? And so that's changing as well. So huge, yeah. There's just something about seeing a person behind a product. It won't change regardless if it's like an enterprise product versus a smaller amount or, any kind of different SaaS.
What are some of the steps? Like right now, if you were coaching me, I'm a CEO, I have a, small to medium-sized product out there. What are some of the things that I need to be doing right now to position myself to be ready to do this story-led marketing?
Yeah, I would first, usually it is the CEO, but sometimes there are some rare cases that the most suitable person at a company might actually be the CTO, right? Like the most suitable subject matter expert, or it's the founder that's not directly the CEO. So step one is assessing who's the right person to be the first, at least, evangelist of the product. Then step two is figuring out, okay, who are your customers? Who is your ideal customer persona, right? Usually the CEO knows this, but it requires some kind of digging to make sure we understand who that person is. And then it's really figuring out what is that person's pain point, what are their desires, what are the things that you usually hear, for example, in a sales call, what do your SDRs hear, what are the objections, right? So that we kind of have a really good sense of when we develop the content framework, we know the questions we need to answer, because we have to start with the customer first. And then of course, step three is also figuring out, okay, who are you as a CEO? How does your expertise connect with all of this? And how can we make sure we highlight your individual stories? Because at the end of the day, when you show up and start creating content and start building your own, thought leadership and personal brand, we have to make sure that it's still your own story, right? And there are ways to kind of infuse that. So there is a very multi-step, process to make sure that we're starting with the ICP first and then connecting the dots, saying, how does your experience make sure that, highlighting your authority and then also answering a lot of those desires and pain points in the content.
And as part of this, as part of telling the stories, how important is it to position the CEO as a thought leader versus a salesperson?
Interesting question. I think it can be both, right? I think the positioning as a thought leader comes first. I think sales is a effect from that, right? If you're a true thought leader, and again, this word is very misrepresented, I think. The way I see being a thought leader, someone that is at the forefront of their industry and has opinions that are slightly different from the rest, and that they are having a stake in the ground and really seeing what is happening, what is coming, what is futuristic, right? And having some contrarian opinions from fact and from what they're seeing. So I think that being a salesperson will obviously be job number one for any CEO. I always say that the CEO's number one thing is to drive demand for their company, right? And being a thought leader actually also does that because it raises your brand awareness, right? It also is generating eyeballs, which is then does drive demand. So in a way, I don't see those things as being very different because we're using thought leadership very specifically and not just saying random things about different topics, right? It does relate to what your company is doing.
Right. It's not just being a thought leader on leadership or running a company, but it's actually having that. The way that I think about it is that you're domain expert that's able to solve problems in that domain. Cybersecurity, for instance, right? You understand cybersecurity, what your product, the problem that it solves, that's really the thought leadership and what's happening in the space, what attacks, what threat vectors, etc. for that example. Versus to me, the salesman is the ability to negotiate and put together, win-win type of deals. Right, is saying, okay, now we're sitting here, you're a larger company, let's actually get something inked out that includes different payment terms, maybe supporting each other as companies to get the deal done. And what I heard clearly from you is that what I think is different is that the traditional salesman is more reactive, waiting for that demand to be there. But when you're actually a outward facing thought leader, in your, out industry, speaking about the problems that you see, how they're being solved, and then always, coming back to your company and the way they're solving some of those specific problems, that's going to attract a lot of attention. And then that attention can then be converted into closed deals.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is also the difference between there's like capturing demand, right? Sometimes you're meeting your buyers where they are and they realize, we had this problem, and through your thought leadership, wherever, you realize this is a company to check out. So you're just capturing the demand, but you can also create demand. This is when you're making someone aware of a problem they didn't really have, right? They might be struggling with other stuff, but they did not really know that the pain is coming from this. And that is also what really good thought leadership can do, or creating very valuable content from a CEO perspective. It's almost saying, hey, companies, you guys were having issues with this and kind of trying to figure out how to fix this issue. Maybe the leak actually started 2 steps ago, and that's what we fix, right?
That's really important. So when you think about this new arena, right, of this storytelling, what are some of the skills and just even ways of thinking that, whether it's the CEOs or the chief marketing officers, what are skills they need to develop and thinking they need to shift to be able to adapt to this?
Great question. This reminds me, maybe I can take a step back, right? Because this reminds me of my time in companies, right? Whether it's in corporate or in a scale up. And I think one of the big things to develop is that customer feedback loop, right? Because great content or great storytelling comes from asking the right questions, right? And if you want to do great storytelling for customers, to attract customers, ideal prospect, you kind of have to ask your current customers what they're struggling with, or really figure out, how did we close that person? What was the thing that made them decide to go with our company? A lot of times companies don't really know that. They do a bunch of stuff, right? Like they have a lot of strategies, a lot of campaigns, a lot of ads, and whoever comes, they don't really what's the trigger. But the companies that really are dialed in really win. So also CEOs, they know which stories, they've anecdote or what data point, whatever they said, that really gives an aha moment. So I think that feedback loop or really active listening skill really helps in storytelling. And also just being able to listen for signals, if that makes sense. That's kind of the triggers that either bought on a sale or when a customer implemented something and then they were really happy, right? Really listening to triggers and saying that is what someone else would want to hear. And as a content creator nowadays, I'm really good at being like, that's a good story. A lot of times CEOs don't realize, they're like, oh, we scaled a company from this to X in this amount of time. And I'm like, oh, that's a story. Or a customer was able to do this in that region and they didn't have to add any additional payroll. I'm like, that's something you should tell. That's the story, So something you just need a kind of a knack for it.
Well, and that's the thing, is learning the art of storytelling, practicing it, because I can relate as well, moving into book writing, podcasting, content creation, you begin to understand what does a interesting topic look like? How do you ask questions around it that is going to give you good output, that may give you a good video, that may give you a good case study, those types of things, I think. And it all has to be customer focused, because ultimately, if, it's interesting how the big shift that I'm seeing from this perspective, we've always known that we need to serve our customers. And I think that there's, marketing that is around how the product helps the customers. But when you talk about stories in people with your product and how your product is helping solve problems that makes ultimately those employees' lives better, like that then creates like this secret sauce of, attraction and relational material that people really want to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The secret sauce. Maybe that should be one of the frameworks. Secret sauce storytelling.
Secret sauce storytelling. Well, I'm sure there's plenty of stories around, grandma's secret recipes.
Oh, yeah. Also.
Right? Exactly.